So for me, it's about change. Businesses, wherever you are, whatever payroll role you do, everyone will stand up and listen if you're making change and it's positive, and it makes a positive impact to your business. So I think it's down to payroll people to continue to do that, to not just go back to what they were doing, carrying on. It's about not just, as I said, it's very hard in payroll. You're not given much time. So it's very easy to just let things go because it's just easier to keep doing it like that than to step back. Don't be the person who steps back. Be the person who says, it might take me an extra hour this time to build an import in, but actually that's going to save me huge amounts of time going forward.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day. Find out what it takes to truly discover what it takes to elevate your career within payroll as we meet with the industry leaders who are shaping the industry for tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to the Payroll Podcast. Today I am joined by Maria Mason, UK Payroll Director at BDO, the UK's fifth largest accountancy and advisory firm. Now, Maria has provided professional payroll and HR services and solutions to clients for over 28 years. She's worked in both the private and public sector. She's worked with clients ranging from one client all the way up to 50,000 members of staff. She is someone who is incredibly passionate about the payroll industry. She's passionate about leveraging technology to improve payroll solutions, and she's very, very experienced in supporting clients to implement systems and processes that improve security and, of course, payroll accuracy. Now, at the moment, Maria leads the UK payroll team within BDO, which consists of over 50 staff members based across 4 locations. She delivers services through her team to over 1,400 clients. And over the past 2 years, she's implemented many new systems, platforms and robotics to ensure the risks associated with payroll and, of course, GDPR are kept to the minimum and efficiencies are, of course, maximised. Now, I've known Maria for a number of years. I've placed her several times throughout her career, so I'm really excited to have her on today's episode. She's also a CIPP intermediate. So without further ado, welcome Maria Mason to the Payroll Podcast.
5 quick questions.
Tell me about some of the changes you've seen within the payroll industry over the past 28 years.
It's quite scary when you think of it like that, the amount of time, but generally just probably how much has changed. And you don't realise until you're given an opportunity like that to look back and think, all right, where were we? When I started, it was mainframes that run payroll, so very, very set in how they processed, and we had things like yellow punching forms that went off to key punching areas, and backs tapes that had to go in and then physically be taken to backs each night, and then paper pay slips, even to the point I still remember paper pay slips that were triplex and actually could have money placed in there. So they used to go off to Securical for a number of our clients, for them to physically put cash, including coins, into these envelopes. So I'm very pleased to say that now, looking across where we are now, we're in a very different situation, and particularly where everything that's happened with COVID, that would have been horrendous.
Can you imagine? I mean, how would you have coped? Put yourself in that position then just for a moment. Can you imagine that the pandemic hit, let's say 20 years ago, 10 years into your career? How do you think you would have coped? What would have been the kind of processes you'd have had to have dealt with, if you like, with obviously payroll being a lot more manual in those times?
I think what we used to have there, and we were very much more reliant because there wasn't any cloud-based, etc. We used to have, I worked for a very large bureau at that point, so we used to have like a data centre, a disaster recovery site, and we used to have to test that 4 times a year, but in there it had our servers and everything, so we would have mirrored tapes, but it was all on tape, so you had to store these in a fireproof. So if we couldn't have physically got into the office, that would have been a major issue, but we paid huge amounts of money to have this area where we could go in, this bomb-proof, fireproof, to literally set up the office exactly the same as it was. So with all the mainframe and the printers, so there used to be printers there, so it cost what just to survive, and we used to test it, but we never ever used it fully, and I don't know if we could have ever used it for how long this had gone on. But yeah, there was an ability, but even then it would never have been tested for this amount of time to carry this amount of people. It could only hold something like 10 people. As you can imagine, if everyone wanted it at the same time, they wouldn't have been able to have coped. So we wouldn't have been able to have run payroll looking back at that time. So to be in this position now is amazing and shows exactly how we've gone forward.
And obviously, at the minute, you're paying, your payroll is much bigger than probably a lot of the people have on their payrolls that are listening to this podcast. You're paying over 50,000 members of staff across 1,400 clients. So, I guess this has had a huge impact on you, the COVID-19 pandemic. But how have you been able to pivot then? What are some of the changes that you've been making as head of that payroll, as payroll director of that function, to make sure that your payrolls have been able to be run accurately and on time for such high volumes?
I think from our perspective, it started a good couple of years ago, and I'm so grateful for that now. When I first came into the business, it was about that stabilisation. It was about utilising technology as a general to help make things more efficient, to ensure that there were less risks, etc. So I started, when I first joined, we looked at all of the systems we had and literally rebuilt the entire platform to ensure that we had stability, we had disaster recovery in there, that we moved away from a lot of the manual intervention that typically and still does take place in a lot of businesses. And so for me, it was about, we put in new payroll platforms, ways of communicating with our clients, because obviously around that time GDPR came in. So from that perspective, that completely changed how you managed your data and the security of that data. So in a way that helped, because it enabled me to bring in platforms to liaise with clients. So we weren't sending emails and reliant upon sort of paper reporting. We were actually placing reporting in a safe environment. Even to the point that we put robotics in to help manage some of those tasks. So to remove the mundane and the sort of repetitive tasks that quite often are associated with payroll, and actually use technology to manage those. So we brought in a lot of electronic pay slips, we pay dashboards, so we had that area there as well. So that enabled us to have that electronic aspect and to remove a lot of the printing. So we've been, for the last sort of 2 years, working towards that, because I'm such a big believer that technology is fundamental to a successful payroll, whether it's in-house, whether you outsource it, if the right technology is utilised, and your payroll will be more accurate. So we've spent a lot of time over the last 3 years putting in a lot more technology to enable us, and that has proven to be fundamental, because I think if we look back even back to 2 years, I think we would have struggled to manage 50 people all working from home and managing 1,400 clients. I just don't think we could have done that, and I think the clients probably would have found it too difficult also to transfer from sort of paper, very manual processes to go into this extreme at this point if we hadn't done that work over the last 2 years.
Have you become a Zooms and MS Teams or whatever, sort of remote management level processes post-COVID, or were you using these already, or is this something that's really come in since the pandemic?
I would say all of that element has definitely come in since the pandemic, because, payroll people generally, even if it's an in-house, they all work together in teams, and quite often a number of people are involved with the payroll processing from start to finish. There are a number of elements involved in that process. And I think, it always used to, maybe like it still does, when people say, oh, you just push a button and payroll works. If only it was that simple. There are a number of steps. There's something like 25 steps in a normal payroll process to get it from start to finish, whether there's one person or 1,000 people. So in there are a number of people that are involved in that. So as a team, we work very closely. So you tended to find that payroll teams, I think if we'd have asked back 6 months ago, would we ever have been able to all work remotely? We'd have said no. And it has caused a lot of burden on the managers to try and manage that remotely. But we're there and we're doing it, and it works really well. And we use typically Skype, Zoom. Some of our clients prefer Zoom, but we use Microsoft Teams and things like that. And they've been fundamental. We have quizzes, we have social events pretty much weekly to just keep the team, because they're so used to being very much connected that when they're not, I think they found that quite difficult. So we make sure that we contact. So we have daily meetings. So I literally log into about 6 meetings a day to just listen to what's going on, make sure everyone sounds okay and it's all going where it needs to go.
So fast forwarding then to post-pandemic, obviously you're clearly a technology adopter. You're clearly someone who's passionate about implementing technology. I know this from knowing you anyway. You like to be ahead of the curve where you can be when it comes to payroll and tech. What do you think are going to be the key technologies or even the key changes that are going to stay in place post-pandemic that perhaps weren't there before? Has it changed the way that we are processing payrolls as a result of what's happened, that perhaps either we've accelerated those journeys or perhaps we hadn't even considered them, that post-pandemic you think are going to remain in place?
Do you know, I think it's accelerated them. I think everyone generally would love to work more efficiently and spend less time keen and less time doing the mundane tasks. I think everyone wants that. But the trouble is with payroll, it happens every month or every week. So we're given very little downtime to make change. So it's very, very hard for companies to actually consider making change because you have such a small window to do that. And you've still got to do the work whilst you're implementing that change. So change is a big stopper in companies moving forward generally, whether it's in-house, outsourced, bureau, it is the same approach. So quite often people put up with things because it's easier. I think this will accelerate because what they've realised is we have a task management system, so we can see everything electronically, but the utilisation both internally with our clients actually has gone up. So things like that I think will certainly accelerate and make people realise that there are better ways of working. We've always sort of promoted much more using the technology, not having paper files and all of these kind of things, but people will naturally go to what they're comfortable with. I think this has forced people to work a different way. So for me, I'm much more confident that that will continue. So clients that maybe thought, oh, people don't have email addresses, so they can't have electronic pay slips. It's surprising how many people found those email addresses when needed. And so from that perspective, I hope those things don't go back and we continue on that route and realise that actually, you know, technology can sometimes feel scary and can feel that it's difficult to get there, but actually the benefits once you've implemented tenfold. So it's certainly worth a little pain initially. So I'm hoping that it's accelerated those areas and that continues. So we will be doing that. We're not so reliant upon having everyone in the office all the time every day, because I think we can be a bit more flexible. But there's no doubt that certainly there are benefits with people being together as well. So, and we know that mentally people actually need that stability and people around, and some people thrive being self-motivated and working there. Others don't find that and are not comfortable in that surrounding, and maybe where they are is not conducive to working as well. So there's lots and lots of considerations, but I think what this has done has shown it can be done differently. And so for me, that's only something for us to continue to work forward, utilise.
So going forward then, Maria, do you think with all this new tech now being utilised with, MS Teams and Zoom and people finding new ways of working, and with new tech being invested into payroll departments, that employees and stakeholders are both starting to expect more from their payroll provision? There's
no doubt. I think one of the things, generally, even when RTI and pensions is a great one, auto enrolment, that brought a lot more pressure onto the payroll teams to have a better understanding of pensions, because it goes through the payroll. People just expect the payroll people will understand that. And so, the team has had to become a lot more equipped, and whereas so much more responsibility has gone on to the client and so then to the payroll departments to manage the importing, uploading, the understanding, much more complexity around pensions. That's already was starting from about 2014. COVID has really, really accelerated that more recently, because obviously with the furlough and the job retention scheme coming into play, and they were complex, there's no doubt about that, to try and calculate that. And I think what it did do was raise the profile where people realised payroll wasn't quite as simple as everyone maybe thought. But what it did do was it put a lot of pressure back onto payroll people being expected to understand that, and just sometimes trying to translate some of the stuff that comes out from the government, etc. It takes quite a lot of work. I've spent a lot of time, and certainly throughout my entire career, that when a new change comes in, so gender pay reporting and things like that come from payroll data, so there's an expectation that we will be able to provide that. Just trying to break it down to understand it and how it will impact our clients to enable us to support them fully. So yeah, I think there's a lot more expectation for payroll people to be a lot more in tune. I think back in the day, and I used to hate it, and I hate it now, when people just think of payroll people as key punchers. These are technically gifted people that have learned their craft and understand their expertise in the legislation that goes around managing UK payroll. And so when people sort of refer, it's just, punching in timesheets. No, that's called key punching. What we do is payroll, and that's analysing clients' rules, that's analysing legislation to ensure that we comply with those. And so for me, yeah, we need people to be more technically gifted, to be more into understanding that, because I think unfortunately sometimes with the systems, they do a lot of the work. So a lot of people lost. Back in my day, you had to learn how to do a payslip with books. And so, it was very, very manual. And so from that perspective, we've lost some of that skill. So I'm really pleased with people like the CIPP that bring that back, because it's so important that people understand the rules go behind payroll to be able to transfer and, more importantly, support the payroll function.
I totally agree. I think you're absolutely right. This pandemic has certainly raised the profile of payroll for senior stakeholders. We've had hiring managers that we've never typically dealt with come to us saying, we'd never considered payroll before, but right now we really need some support in these areas, or our CGRS claims are going to be incorrect and we want to get it right. And, there's a real appreciation right now for the role that payroll professionals are having, across the industry, across all markets, keeping key workers paid and keeping industry moving. So it's been really important. But you make some interesting points there. One is that you talk about, at the beginning of the podcast, how passionate you are about bringing in new technology. I know that from knowing you for many, many years, Maria, that you, as I said, you like to be ahead of the curve with tech. But what you've also done is you've highlighted why it's important that payroll people, are continue to be employed and continue to grow as an industry, because you need that technical skill. So there is a lot of media news out there talking about how technology may replace people in payroll. How would you respond to that? Because you're someone who wants to bring in tech that does take away some of those mundane tasks, but at the same time, you clearly have an appreciation for the role payroll people play. So how do you see the future working relationship between payroll and technology? And how do you see the future of payroll as an industry?
I think for me, will technology completely replace people? No. I don't believe that. I certainly don't believe that within my business. I think what it does do is remove a lot of the risk. It removes a lot of the mundane tasks that, to me, as I said, are not payroll. So key punching in a lot of timesheets is not payroll. That's key punching. So to use technology to be able to import that in, or use API to manage that, robotics, etc., that to me is not payroll. So what that does is, by taking some of that work away that was a huge part of payroll over the years, by removing that, you actually give payroll people more time to actually analyse, understand their craft, understand the legislation in more detail, understand how that works, develop their own careers, and actually now take on more and more of the elements. Because in most businesses, it's very hard to understand what's HR, what's payroll, what's finance, because payroll sits in the middle of all of that and is feeding pretty much, or taking information from each of those areas. So the more time that people have, the more they can utilise to develop those skills. Actually, I see it as a benefit. So if I look at the work that my team undertake now, it's a much more, it's removed a lot of the mundane key elements and the time-consuming elements, actually enabled them to be able to focus, spend more time with their clients, have more of a relationship, do what I think is the nice part of payroll, the bit that we all wanted to do. So to build those skills there. So for me, it's about actually, this will enable them to develop more and have more time to do it. Because I think in payroll, as I said earlier, it's all the time. It never stops. And so, and particularly if we're in bureaus, we're processing every single day. There is no downtime. So to just be able to give my team some time to breathe, actually be able to spend time on their payrolls, means our accuracy levels are much, much higher. It means we spend less time correcting elements. It means they can become more involved with some of the pension work, become more involved in some of the, gender pay and the additional things that are now coming into our domain. Actually, that just grows their skill sets and makes them, suddenly more valuable in the market. So for me, that's only a great thing for payroll people.
Excellent. Well, that was a really, really great response. And, you make an interesting point again. I think something that highlights to me during this pandemic is, most of the systems, no matter what technology you had, I don't think, well, presumably there weren't any systems that were configured to handle CJRS and furlough, because furlough didn't exist before this pandemic. And it just goes to show that, that was brought in. Payrollers had to pivot immediately to be able to handle the new demands of furlough calculations. And of course, there were no systems ready for it. And I'm not criticizing system providers here, because you can't be ready for something that's never happened before. It's brand new legislation, so there's no blame being attached. But it did show the importance of the payroll professional in being able to handle the new legislation, be able to calculate the new legislation correctly to make sure that businesses didn't fall down in their payrolls, and their payments when this new legislation came into play, while they were potentially waiting for their systems to catch up. And it just goes to show, technology can have a great role, as you say, removing some of those mundane tasks. But actually, when it really mattered, I guess, payroll people were actually right at the fore, going right back to those manual skills, which are still so important to be able to process those payments correctly. So I think you highlighted that really, really well. Well, listen, in a minute, we're going to find out a little bit more about yourself, Maria. And then when we come back, we're going to find out more about the future of payroll, because it's something we're both passionate about. If you love payroll as much as I do, then this is a quick request to say at the end of this podcast, please share it with your colleagues, review it if you can, and of course, hit subscribe. Payroll, as we know, is changing at a rapid pace. So here is a little song to remind you why you never want to miss a future episode. That song and you want to hear more, you can access it right now on iTunes, Amazon and Spotify. But for now, let's get back to the podcast.
Time to find out more about you.
I'd like to ask you, which individual has influenced your career?
I don't think there's anyone. You know me very well. I tend to like to lead myself, so I can't say that there's any one individual. I like anyone, or I'm inspired by anyone that is first and is not prepared to just go with the flow. So, you look at some of the people out there like Steve Jobs, Apple, you look at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. I think they're amazing to take something that didn't exist and to completely change how that works going forward. I think people like that are inspirational. But I think, you had Oracle, Larry Ellison in Oracle, and like Google. I love how they hit the market and how they attracted the right levels of staff and things like that. I think anyone that can take something and literally make it leading and it wasn't there before, I think is inspirational. And so I think there's some great people out there that have done that. So I can't say there's any one person, but I think there are lots and lots of people that I think are inspirational in changing. And for me, I don't ever want to follow. For me, at the end of my career, I want to be able to say that there were a number of firsts that I achieved that weren't done in my industry. And I was one of the youngest managers when I first came into business, one of the first female salespeople. There were lots and lots of firsts, and I continue to work on that now. For me, it's about changing what is in there now and changing that landscape and being part of that change. That for me has always been important. So anyone like that is where I'll look to be inspired by.
Excellent. I'm quite glad you referenced the sales, as you say, one of the first female salespeople, because I had a part to play in that, because I know that for those that are not familiar with this podcast, I've worked with Maria as a recruiter for, God, must be nearly 2 decades, and have very, very proud to say that I've placed Maria on a number of occasions in new positions, including the role at BDO. There's an interesting story behind that, which I'm going to quickly tell because I think it's quite fun. Maria's reports into a guy called David, who joined us at a recruitment trip to Wimbledon. And we were in a cafe and just outside the station. And David said to us, look, Nick, I need someone who knows payroll inside out, has loads of passion, is passionate about technology, but I also need someone who's got skills in areas like business development, understands how it interacts with HR and finance, isn't scared of selling, but can also manage large teams. And I was like, you are literally describing a unicorn. This is really difficult to find someone with all these skills, but there's one person I know, and we're having this conversation. I said, I haven't spoken to Maria for a little while, but there's a person I know called Maria, and I think she'd be perfect for this opportunity. Let me reach out to her. Anyway, lo and behold, we did reach out. It was perfect timing. You ended up meeting David. You secured the job on all of your great experience and credentials, secured that very quickly. And it was a year later, to the day, Wimbledon, the following year, we were in the same cafe, only this time we had invited Maria to join us. And we were sat on the same table, on the same chairs, not completely by chance. And we were just sat there, and I suddenly realised, I said, Maria, do you realise a year ago today, we were sat in exactly the same spots? Complete chance. And it's when David said, who do I know? And a year later, we're sat in the same seats and you were joining us at Wimbledon. So I thought that was a really lovely little story. But you've secured that role and made it your own. I'm sure there's going to be many, many more firsts in your life to come. And you're enjoying things at BDO at the moment.
Love it. Love it. And that was another first. For me, I'd always said I would never go into the accountancy world. Payroll wasn't king. And for me, I'd always worked for initially very large bureaus and then going to smaller companies and building those bureaus and building them to be the biggest in their industry. So when I worked in the education sector, so for me, it was always I'd gone where, you know, payroll was key to the business I was in. And so then for me, that was never where I'd seen accountants at that point. They had never placed that same level of importance. You know, it was tax and audit that, you know, sort of decided their business futures. And so from that perspective, it was never an option. I remember when you called me and I was like, oh, no, that's not being, you were like, no, you're going to love them. They're completely different. You need to go there. This is exactly what they want to do. You know, they want to place that. They know that payroll has a strong importance in their business, but it's just not work. And we, you know, they want somebody to make it work. And for me, that was another thing about being that first, being able to go in and completely show that if you utilize technology, you run it correctly, you can actually have a very successful, profitable business. And actually payroll is a great way of us getting into new clients because, you know, payroll's on 5th generation of outsourcing. So from that perspective, they're used to it, they understand it. And so it's a way of building trust. And if people can trust you to pay their staff, they certainly are more happy to talk to you about other areas that you can help them with. And so for me to go into a business and obviously go into, you know, one of the top 5 and actually then make those changes to the point now we have a very profitable business. We're growing, we're one of the fastest growing areas and within BDO, and continue to move it forward and use technologies, robotics. We've got the strongest return of investment on any robotic projects they've done internally. So from that perspective, it's great. And it's great for us to have that place and for it now to be recognised as a great way and a great part of the business. And so for me, that was another first. And so I'm really pleased to see that. So, yeah.
Well, I have no doubt you'll achieve everything you want to achieve where you are. And you've got a great career path ahead of you, I'm sure. And I know that you're very, very well thought of and you've achieved masses. You mentioned trust in there, and to be honest, you know, it was trust in David to us, but also I think it was luckily I'd known you for 2 decades that you know I was fortunate that you were able to trust me when I said take a look at it, because you know that's the relationship we had, which was very fortunate that you knew that if I was calling you about something, it was worth listening to, and this is where we are, which is just a fantastic story, and one of the things I love about recruitment, and one of the things I love about payroll. So it's a nice story. So taking it further, you've touched upon a couple of resources already. You mentioned the CIPP earlier. Are there any resources that have really helped you on your career journey? And if it's not your career journey, any resources that you think could help someone else on their payroll career journey?
Do you know, I'm a massive believer, I think COVID has shown that. I wasn't an expert in COVID, the same as nobody else was in the CJ RS schemes or any of those. I wasn't an expert when it came out. I knew no more than anyone else, whereas I can quite happily say I sit on a board within BDO and are responsible for, providing our clients with all of the collateral and communication we have done throughout this entire period on that. And for me, one of the things I would always say to anyone in this industry, and it was something taught to me very many years ago, understand what's out in the market, understand the industry you're in. And that doesn't mean just about qualifications. That's about understanding the tools out there, system solutions, what other people are utilising, what's out there. I utilise, I'll go on to a lot of HMRC webinars and things like that when they bring something out or they're just doing something on holiday pay, etc. Spend a lot of time analysing what's going on in the market, competitors, etc. Because that is one of the most valuable tools that I have, is my understanding of what we do and what the platform is. So when I'm speaking to a client and they want to talk about time and attendance, I understand the time and attendance systems that are out there. It's not something that we specifically offer, but I know as a payroll specialist, we have to interact with these tools. And so from that perspective, one of the things I would always say to everyone, there's so much free work out there with the HMRC and things like that. They're brilliant at their webinars, and it's not often that I'll ever praise the HMRC, although I have to say they've been amazing. And so from that perspective, I think, utilize those tools around you. There's so much information, and with the internet now and social media, there's a lot more on LinkedIn and things like that. So it's really worth, following people, understanding, because the amount of information and news, etc., that you can get by using these platforms is amazing. And, go out there and learn your craft, understand it's not just about having qualifications, because for me to be able to move in this business and do a multitude of different jobs throughout this, from implementation, sales, global sales, I've had an element, and it's all within the payroll arena. That has only come because of my knowledge of all of the things surrounding that. So the systems in place, the tools out there, how to work more efficiently, technology, ways of finding better ways of running processes, all of those things will help. So I would really say, there's some great stuff out there. ICAEW are brilliant. Obviously, they're more connected to accountancy, but when you have any kind of taxation changes or anything like that, they're amazing in some of the stuff. So some of their COVID releases were fantastic, and certainly much more in the layman's terms. So, easy to decipher, which I know sometimes information that isn't quite as good as that. But people like that, they're fantastic at being able to do that. And I would always say to anyone who's going through this process and working in this arena, go and read the magazines, go out there and understand what's in there, linked in, use those elements, use key people like yourself and people like that to attach, to understand what is happening in our arena, because everything that happens, whether you're a bureau and in-house, everything has an impact. How can you bring something to a business if you don't know what's out there to bring?
It's that skills and attitude debate again, isn't it? It's, you can have all the skills and that's great, but you need an attitude to go alongside it. You need that willingness to go and find out more, that willingness to go on a self-discovery journey, to be better at what you do. And that comes with knowledge, that comes with research, that comes with a proactive nature. All the things that you've clearly demonstrated, Maria, and certainly from a recruitment perspective, we're always looking for candidates that do ask questions and are inquisitive about the roles that we're putting by them, or they see in the market, or about how we're seeing the market change. Because an inquisitive nature, the ability to ask questions, will always help people find out more information that can help progress their careers and progress their roles and their responsibilities. So I think you're absolutely right. The ability to ask questions, ability to be inquisitive and to have that attitude to want to research can really help progress a career. So let's take it back a little bit then let's find out a little bit more about the Maria behind payroll here. So we're going to make a fictional dinner party. You can invite 3 people. Who would they be and why? And they can be dead or alive.
Oh, okay. Right. I think for me, definitely want somebody funny. So we'll throw in a comedian, I think. So a Mickey Flanagan, a Peter Kay, somebody like that will keep the sort of conversation flow going, but actually can bring it up a bit when needed. So certainly would like somebody like that. I think for me, then it would be a leader, somebody who'd done something first. So Barack Obama, even Margaret Thatcher, that I know might be controversial for some, but just the fact she was the first lady prime minister, and people like that have changed how their role was done. And I think for me, that certainly, as we discussed earlier, that is a big thing for me. So I'm always intrigued by somebody like that. So definitely one of those. And then I think, I'm thinking like a royalty, but I love Tudor time. That is like my real royal time. So it would be like a Henry VIII. But then I was thinking, actually, maybe his first wife, she went through hell and was obviously an extremely strong woman. And so for me to be married to his brother, then actually marrying and then disbanded by everyone and then brought back in, marrying him 25 years, runs off with her, lady in waiting, that was one tough woman. And so I think for me, somebody like that to just get to understand them. So they'd be the kind of people that I would like.
Amazing. Some good Tudor knowledge there. I like it. Very good. Excellent. Well, there you go. Something I never knew. I've known you for 20 years. I never knew you were so passionate about the Tudors. So last question before we jump back into the BDO payroll piece, and we'll talk a little bit about compliance as well. If you had any superpower, Maria, what would it be and why?
Yeah, for me, it would be, people talk about invisibility and things like that. No, that isn't there. Flying. I think for me, it would be able to read people's minds. I'm very, very inquisitive. I rely a lot of what I do with interviewing and lots of things like that on body language. And I'm a very people person. I'm really intrigued by what makes people tick and things like that. So I think for me, just to understand what's going on in there, I think for me that would be where I'd want to go, is to be able to read minds and hear. Probably wouldn't want to hear half of it.
Awesome. Well, that sounds good to me. I can understand why you're definitely a people person, so I can totally understand why you've picked it. We're going to jump to a quick advert break. When we come back, we're going to find out more about BDO, more about compliance, and more about the future of payroll. So stay with us.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can I recruit payroll staff effectively? Please don't give up on your recruitment project just yet. Here at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting and retaining top payroll talent. We also understand just how costly a poor payroll hire can be. JGA Recruitment are a niche payroll recruitment agency who will partner with you to resource payroll candidates who will improve both the accuracy and efficiency of your payroll department. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
5 technical questions.
So, Maria, of course, we've mentioned a couple of times, you are managing one of the biggest payrolls in the UK, 1,400 clients. What's the future of payroll within BDO? When I say BDO, I mean within, big accountancy, big bureau, client services. It's a whole specialism within payroll. What's the future then within those sort of outsourced services that you see for payroll?
For us, if we just go through what's happened over the last 4 months, we've grown considerably and it continues. So I think what COVID did do is it made people realise, was payroll, if they run in-house, was it core and did they need it? Did they have the skill sets and the technology and everything to cope through these difficult times? So I think that has seen a surge in people looking at outsourcing and how their businesses run going forward. So I think that's very, very positive. I think we'd already started to experience a lot of change with companies where I think a lot more of our clients are seeing that more sort of consolidated service, not necessarily wanting to deal with lots and lots of different providers, want more that trusted advisor. Going back to what we spoke about earlier about training, about understanding that market, because quite often clients will come to me, as I said, it might be about a time and attendance system. It might be about a new pension scheme. and they're not necessarily things that we can immediately help them with. So we'll find partners and things like that. But you want to be that trusted advisor, because if a client comes to you first, you have the opportunity in there. So for accountancy world, I think that's absolutely invaluable, because so much of what we do and how business works has some level of attachment to an accountancy firm. So for me, that's really, really important. And I think we've really harnessed that and seen that during the COVID, and with regards to communication and the support that people needed during that period. So I think that will continue, and I think we'll see that, and that's an area that we're very strong on, about being that trusted advisor. I think we're also seeing a lot of movement in the global market, where people typically just worried about their payrolls in the countries they were in. But now that consolidated service, having it in one place that actually controls all of that. So we're seeing a lot more movement, and certainly through our global service offerings, we're seeing a massive increase in clients that are looking at that, because actually longer term it's much more cost effective, because you're not spending all that time trying to consolidate. And people want data from their payroll now, and they've realized just how important that payroll information is, and it's probably holding about 80% of your revenue in your staff costs. So from that perspective, it's important you understand it and control it. So I think more clients from us are demanding better reporting, wanting better accounts, and not because it's an accounts firm, but actually from their payroll, and more interaction between countries and different services. So yeah, I think that's where we're seeing it. So it's very positive for payroll.
You talked about, as you say, the globalization of payroll is again changing rapidly. We're seeing lots of companies, particularly as recruiters, who used to just have small UK payrolls, and already now they've got big EMEA operations. Communications made global operations much more achievable and easier to manage. And as you say, it's been changing quickly. But of course, there's different compliance in every single region, which again adds to the complexities of payroll. So how do you help clients stay up to date in those areas of compliance, particularly because it's a really fast changing landscape, and payroll is often at the forefront of these changes. So that's got to be quite challenging for you. So how do you make sure clients are compliant across multiple regions and up to date?
We have a lovely site that helps us, and particularly for COVID, there was another one just for COVID that actually enabled them to ascertain in each country what the rules were in there. Obviously, we're very fortunate that we are in 167 countries, so we have experts in all of those countries. So we have a big global support team in there that works centrally, and so we're able to then pull from all of that expertise in there. And so we do have the central globalization side, and then we have obviously the UK specific. So that enables us to get that. So even with myself, I talk to a number of countries pretty much daily with regards to what's occurring on our clients, etc. Because you have to have an understanding. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. I have an understanding of pretty much taxation in most countries. Why? Because I've made sure I understood, because it's important for me when a client is talking about another country to have an understanding of what that means, particularly if people are moving between countries. So we do a lot of global mobility work for our clients and advising as to where somebody's tax should be paid based upon where they live, etc., and where they're working. And so that's a huge area of our business. And so it's so important to have an understanding. So they're the kind of things I would say. There's loads of information, even on the BDO website, that can help people to understand some of that. And it's so important to understand if you want to give the best advice, and actually just have that skill set in your back pocket at all times to have an understanding.
Super. Now, we've talked a couple of times about the profile of payroll being raised during COVID-19, where stakeholders have recognised the important role that payrollers have played in keeping the UK paid. What I'd like to know is, someone who's so passionate about the industry, like yourself, Maria, how do we, as an industry, maintain this profile, or even continue to push this profile going forward? We want to try and avoid falling back to where we were, right? Let's try and keep it where we are. But how do we do that? If I gave you that task, what would you say?
I think for me now, it's about, we've proven, I think during COVID, all payroll people have proven how they can move things forward, how they can ensure that, people We've moved people forward. We've shown our profile. We've shown our expertise and everything else. What I think is important now is, as you said, we don't let that go. We do not let people sit back and just think payroll's another key bank, because it won't take long for people to go back to normal. Let me tell you, it doesn't matter how long everyone's worked from home, etc., and done that. And as I keep saying to myself, at the end of the day, it would take a matter of days before everyone forgets this. So for me, it's about change. Businesses, wherever you are, whatever payroll role you do, everyone will stand up and listen if you're making change and it's positive. And it makes a positive impact to your business. So I think it's down to payroll people to continue to do that, to not just go back to what they were doing, carrying on. It's about not just, as I said, it's very hard in payroll. You're not given much time. So it's very easy to just let things go, because it's just easier to keep doing it like that than to step back. Don't be the person who steps back. Be the person who says, it might take me an extra hour this time to build an import in, but actually that's going to save me huge amounts of time going forward. Don't be the person who's prepared to just accept what's there. Push, ask the questions, do it, because there's no business out there that doesn't want to get a better return of investment, that wants to actually see their costs go down and their profits go up. There is not one business out there that would be upset by that. So for me, it's about payroll has a duty now about continuing to push forward and about continuing to use technology, improving what we do and how we do that, because it doesn't matter what role you hold in payroll, that's the bit that will get us seen, and that's the bit that will keep us at that top level and people taking it seriously and understanding that it can be there. Because unfortunately for payroll, and particularly if you're in a house, you're a cost, so you're not making money, but there are ways of making it much more efficient, and there are ways that you can reduce those costs and actually improve your risk. And so for me, whatever position you're in, there's an opportunity to make change.
Yeah, I think you've made a really clear point there, because ultimately, as you say, it's an expensive department with 80% of, as you say, most businesses pay out. But ultimately, if you can make a cost saving that significantly implements a strategic objective, through the data, through efficiency improvements, it can have a huge impact on a business performance. So you're absolutely right. And I think, everything you said there was a great way to keep the profile moving forward. Let's hope that does continue.
And just to give an example that it's not always about huge amounts of money, I think from our perspective, when we bought in a robotic to move reporting around to ensure security, etc., and we bought in the robotics, I think the investment was no more than 15k, but within the first year it saved over £200,000
wow.
in time in 1 year.
That's a brilliant example.
And so for me, it's not about huge amounts of money, because I know sometimes people sit there going, oh, well, they're not going to pay £1,000 for a new system and all of these kind of things. Actually, sometimes that investment, and it might be just an import. We've done that on one payroll. We had a client that was working with 150 sites, and we built a system. It was just a macro system, so it wasn't a big piece of technology. Built a macro, and that saved 4 hours a month.
And that adds up over the course of a year. It adds up. Well, a great way to finish the questions and open the vault.
Entering the vault.
So what's one piece of advice you would give to someone working in payroll right now?
Learn your craft, understand what's out there. Don't just focus on the processing, understand what's out in the market, tools, etc. So you have a much wider experience to enable you to actually decide this. As I said, I've worked in payroll, as you said, for nearly 30 years, and I've probably only worked in 4 companies during that time, but I've done a wide range of jobs and I've learned some great skills. And I think from that perspective, payroll isn't just about processing. I've done some, amazing work in global sales and things like that. So there's lots and lots of opportunities in there that are related to payroll, that are not necessarily related to processing. But you need to understand what goes on in the industry to be able to do those kind of roles. So I would say to anyone out there, learn that craft.
Excellent. If you had the power of foresight and could change the entire payroll industry with just one action or one improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
It probably, it sounds awful. It probably would have been something like this, that sort of force people to actually so electronic pay slips and things like that force them into a situation of having to do something. So one of the things I always talk about in payroll, one of the best things, and I never thought this would be, was RTI. I remember when that came in and being horrified. It was horrendous in 2014. We had that, the pension auto, it was just...
I remember it well. They came at the same time, didn't they? Auto enrollment in RTI, yes.
It was I just remember it being literally hell on earth in that April. But what I will say is, I remember at the time thinking, oh, why would they do this? This is so painful. I have never been so grateful for RTI, because if I think back to when I was doing year ends then and having to manually, go in and reconcile a payroll to then submit it, now it's just a matter of ticking a box. It's completely changed how payroll works.
You know what? You may be looking at this in the same way. What are we on now? From 14 to 20, 6 years on, you may be looking back, because again, of all the timings, the pandemic has hit us in April, right? In the middle of a year-end process again. It might be 6 years now. You're looking back, going, that pandemic, from a payroll perspective, I'm not for a second taking away from the travesties of people that have suffered from it, but in terms of how things have advanced in the way that we're doing remote meetings and all these kind of things, you may find we're looking back and going, you know what, from a payroll perspective, in terms of how quickly it advanced the industry, that was a real shift, which it was a good thing in a sense that it progressed it a lot quicker than it ever would have progressed had that pandemic not occurred.
Oh, I agree. I do honestly believe that if I look at how much more advanced we've got, how much more accepting our clients have had to be to change because they had no choice themselves, and how many will really go back and things like that. So I think this has been, and it's an awful thing to say, but I think one of the things that I'm always a big believer in is in any situation, you try to find the positive, and that's what you focus on and work forward with. And I think for me, that's how I look at this right now, is if somebody had told me this a year ago, 2 years ago, would we be sitting having this conversation? And I had such a positive outlook on where businesses, or certainly payroll businesses, are now. Absolutely not. And so for me, I think, that's a bit that we cannot lose. We've got to keep going with that and not fall back.
So how would you sell payroll as a career?
Oh, see, this is what this is when I become so passionate, because people sort of say, oh, payroll's not done. Oh, no, it is very dynamic. And I think it's about looking at it differently. Yeah, payroll is a wonderful process because it is a logical process. So it has a start and a finish. And so from that perspective, I love that kind of piece of work. But for me, I look at my career and I have done everything from being a payroll manager, a payroll processor, a payroll manager, an implementer, an account manager, a salesperson, a global salesperson, a director, marketing director. It has enabled me to do, and all within this industry. And it has so much more to it. And that's something that I really want people to understand. There's so much more to it than just processing the payroll. There's so much more attached. And so for me, I think, it's about choosing the right business. It's about understanding what you want to get from your business, because everyone has different drivers. Everyone has something that they're working towards. It's quite obvious, and I've never hidden. I'm extremely ambitious. I was hoping with age it might calm, but it
doesn't sound like it has.
My husband keeps saying, it's never going to go, is it? It's like, no, it's always that next. I'm very driven by success, and it's not necessarily, it's not a monetary success. It's very much about that challenge of doing something that hasn't been done before. So whether that's growth, whether that's producing something, being the best, return of investment in the business, and bringing in robotics first within my industry, that for me, there are all things that keep me very driven. So I think payroll can be exceedingly dynamic and have a wide, everyone needs payroll. Everyone has to be paid. So it's actually very secure. And I think anyone in payroll at the moment, I've seen such a movement in the market at the moment. We're currently recruiting. And so from that perspective, the amount of people that we've had, and they're looking and things like that. And I think from my perspective, there's so much opportunity out there. So for me, it's a nice, safe, secure area. People always need to have payroll. It's a great profession. And I think, but more importantly, there's so much more that surrounds it. It's not just about processing payroll. I don't even know if my team would allow me to do it anymore.
Well, I think you've come full circle. I think that's an amazing way to finish the podcast. You've sold it absolutely brilliantly. Clearly you are incredibly passionate about it, which I knew that anyway. I know that you and I could talk for most of the day about most of these subjects. But I think one thing that comes across is your passion for the subject. And I know from working with you that you're absolutely right. You know, your skills aren't just anyone's skills in payroll don't have to be defined just by payroll processing. You can go into project management, implementation, sales. A couple of podcasts ago, I spoke to Steve Sowitz, who's become a billionaire through the payroll industry. So anything is possible. And thank you so much for joining me today, Maria, on this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you finally on board. I've been keen to have you on this podcast for a long, long time. Before we do finish, obviously, I'd like to mention a couple of links for anyone interested in finding out more about Maria personally. I will add her LinkedIn profile to the episode notes. Take a look at that. And also, I'll put a couple of links to BDO's business and outsourcing services, particularly in relation to payroll. So if you're interested in those services, again, take a look at the episode notes. And there's also a link to, as Maria mentioned during the podcast, their COVID-19 Resource Centre, which is full of loads and loads of helpful information and guides for organisations at this time. So if you're interested in accessing that, again, a link will be in the episode notes. Of course, if you are a payroll leader listening to this podcast and you have a payroll-related vacancy like Maria, and we're working with her at the minute, then please do give me a call. I'd love to support you as well. As Maria has very well mentioned there, a lot of clients at the minute are still seeking payroll support, particularly with help with things like CJRS claims, because payroll has continued to be employed and has continued to work and is absolutely in demand. So if you need support with great talent, do give me a call, 01727 800 377 or nick@jjrecruitment.com. That brings us to a close, Maria. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been my absolute pleasure having you here.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you, Nick. Always.
You too. I can't wait till lockdown is over. We can meet up over one of those favourite glasses of wine that we enjoy. And I'll look forward to speaking to all of you listeners again very soon. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Nick, and join us next time.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment. If you need help with a current payroll vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favourite podcast channels. Till next time.